It happens in seconds, a family stranded, a language no one understands, and a security standoff escalating on the public stage of an international terminal. But from the cargo bay, a man in a high-vis vest is watching. He shouldn't get involved. He's just a baggage handler, but he knows what they're saying, every panicked word, and what happens next will drop a CEO's briefcase in stunned silence. This is Andrew, a single dad, a ground crew worker loading luggage for minimum wage, and a man with a secret that the entire multi-billion-dollar airline industry has systematically overlooked. Because Andrew speaks 5 languages, including fluent Arabic, a skill worth a 20% pay premium anywhere else. But here, it's invisible, until today, because the woman who just dropped her briefcase, she owns the airline. Every morning, before the first flight lands, Andrew clocks in at 4 a.m. His world is measured in baggage weight and turnaround time, not vocabulary or verb conjugation. And that's by design. The airline industry runs on a simple, brutal calculus. Ground operations are a cost center. Jobs like his ramp agent, baggage handler have the highest turnover. The pay is often minimum wage. The work is backbreaking, done in pounding rain and blistering heat. And the system is built on one assumption: these roles require muscle, not mind. Especially not a mind that thinks in 5 languages. But here's what the spreadsheets miss. Andrew didn't just learn Arabic, he lived it. For 3 years after college, he taught English in Amman, Jordan. He learned the language not from a textbook, but in crowded souks and over countless cups of sweet tea, mastering not just words, but the quiet cultural syntax of respect and family. He came home fluent, with a degree in linguistics and a passport full of stamps. Then life intervened. His daughter Lily was born. Her mother left shortly after. Overnight, Andrew's priorities fractured. The career path in translation or international relations, paths where his skills had tangible value, required travel, unpaid internships, a flexibility he no longer had as a sole parent. He needed stability, health insurance, a schedule that ended when the last flight departed so he could be home for bedtime stories. The airport was the answer. It was also the compromise. He became a number in the system, employee ID 7428, a body in a high-vis vest, and the system has a powerful way of making you forget who you were before you put it on. For 8 hours a day, he exists in a state of deliberate invisibility. Passengers look through him. Management sees a liability to be managed, not an asset to be cultivated. This is the central, unspoken truth of his industry. Research shows that being bilingual can boost your earnings by 20%. Companies desperately need these skills. 90% of US employers rely on bilingual staff. Yet in the airport's operational hierarchy, that value evaporates. A baggage handler who speaks Arabic is paid exactly the same as one who doesn't. The skill is recorded nowhere in his file. It's a ghost in the machine. So Andrew buried that part of himself. It became a private fact, like a faded tattoo. It surfaced only in quiet moments, helping a confused tourist find a gate, calming an elderly couple who spoke only Polish. Small, unrewarded acts of translation that vanished into the airport's endless noise. Until this flight. Saudi Arabia Flight 115 from Riyadh had been a problem from touchdown. A paperwork snafu with a connecting refugee family, a mother, father, and 2 young boys, left them stranded at the border between the secure area and the public terminal. They held temporary travel documents. They spoke no English. The border agent was frustrated, overworked. The family's anxiety was tipping into panic. The mother was crying. The father's voice was rising in defensive fear. "Sir, you need to step back. I do not understand you." The agent's hand moved toward his radio. The scene was crystallizing into a textbook escalation, fear on both sides, weaponized by a language barrier. From 30 yards away, Andrew froze, a heavy cargo container half-loaded onto his belt. The Arabic washed over him, not the formal modern standard Arabic of news broadcasts, but the Levantine dialect he knew intimately. The father wasn't being aggressive. He was desperately repeating, "My brother is here, he is waiting, please, we have a letter." Andrew's feet moved before his mind could calculate the risk. Stepping out of the cargo bay and into the passenger terminal was a violation. Ground crew aren't front of house. They are not paid to interact. They are paid to stay out of sight. He approached from the side, his vest suddenly feeling like a costume. He raised his hands, palms out, a universal sign of peace, and spoke. His voice was low, calm, filtering into the tense space between the agent and the family. Asterisk Arlen Shufi, Keef Nastadi, hello, what's the matter? How can we help? The effect was physical. The father's shoulders dropped an inch. The mother's crying hitched into a gasp of recognition. They both turned to him, their words tumbling out in a relieved torrent. Andrew listened, nodded, then turned to the stunned border agent. His brother is a permanent resident. He's right outside arrivals. He has the correct paperwork from immigration. They just got separated in the crowd. The letter is in his jacket pocket. 2 minutes, that's all it took. 2 minutes to transform a brewing incident into a resolved procedure. The agent, now flustered for a different reason, took the letter. The family was reunited at the doors, sobbing in relief. Andrew gave a slight, polite nod and turned to slip back into the flow of his real job. But he was no longer invisible. In the first-class lounge overlooking the concourse, Ilara Vance had seen it all, not as a passenger, but as the founder and CEO of Orajet Airlines. She was waiting for her own delayed flight, reviewing a grim quarterly report on employee retention. She watched the scene unfold with a professional's cold eye, a service failure in the making. Then she saw the worker in the orange vest intervene. She saw the panic dissolve. She saw the precise, respectful bow of his head as he spoke, a gesture of deep cultural competence, not just linguistic skill. And that's when the leather briefcase, worth more than Andrew's monthly rent, slipped from her fingers and hit the polished floor with a thud that echoed in the quiet lounge. Her mind wasn't on the cost. It was racing with numbers of a different kind. The cost of a bad viral video, the cost of a lawsuit, the cost of training that clearly wasn't working, and the staggering, overlooked value of what she had just witnessed, a $20 an hour employee possessing a crisis resolution skill her entire corporate training department could not instill. She stood up, her assistants moved to follow. "No," she said, her voice quiet but absolute, "I'll go alone." Down on the concourse, Andrew felt a hand on his shoulder. His supervisor, Mike, whose face was flushed with anger. "Barnes, what the hell was that? You don't leave your post. You don't talk to passengers. You don't talk to security. Are you trying to get us all sued?" Andrew opened his mouth to explain, but the words died as he looked over Mike's shoulder. A woman in an impeccably tailored navy blazer was walking toward them with a directness that parted the airport crowds like a wake. Her gaze was fixed on him, bypassing his sputtering supervisor entirely. Mike followed his look, his anger faltering into confusion. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Ilara Vance didn't even glance at him. She stopped in front of Andrew, her eyes scanning his vest, his name tag, his face. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then she spoke, her voice clear and carrying. "Andrew, my name is Ilara Vance. I own this airline. What you just did, where did you learn to do that?" Before he could answer, Mike cut in, his voice straining with nervous authority. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is an internal personnel matter. Mr. Barnes violated safety protocol. He needs to come with me." Vance finally turned her head just a few degrees. The look she gave Mike was so devoid of emotion, it was more terrifying than any shout. "This," she said, "is no longer your matter." She turned back to Andrew, the intensity returning to her eyes. "I asked you a question." And in that suspended moment, with his boss silenced and a billionaire CEO demanding an answer, Andrew Barnes realized the fragile world he'd built. The world of clocking in and clocking out, of staying invisible, was about to shatter. The airport lounge Ilara Vance led him to wasn't for passengers. It was a glass-walled corporate annex, soundproofed and sterile. The door clicked shut, sealing them in a sudden, quiet vacuum. Mike, his supervisor, was left on the other side, his face a snapshot of pure, powerless fury. Andrew stood awkwardly, his dirty work boots on the pristine carpet. Vance didn't sit. She paced once to the window, watching the ground crew below, tiny ants moving cargo. "You defused that in under 3 minutes," she said, not turning around. "My crisis management team has hour-long protocols for less, so I'll ask again, where did you learn that?" The truth came out in fragments. The teaching in Jordan, the linguistics degree, The 5 languages, Arabic, Spanish, French, Polish, and of course English. He mentioned it not as a boast, but as a simple resume of facts he'd packed away. With each one, Vance's posture changed. The CEO's analytical detachment began to crack, revealing something sharper beneath, a furious, calculating recognition. 5 languages, she repeated, finally turning to face him, and you're loading bags for $16 an hour. It wasn't a question, it was an indictment of her entire operation. Before Andrew could form a response, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and a thin, cold smile touched her lips. Human resources, your friend Mike is very fast. She silenced the call and looked back at Andrew. They're recommending immediate suspension, pending investigation for breach of operational safety and unauthorized passenger engagement. Andrew felt the floor tilt. Suspension meant no pay. Lily's daycare bill was due next week. I was just trying to help, he said, the words sounding hopelessly naive. I know you were, Vance said, but in this system, helping outside your designated box is a fireable offense. It exposes the fact that the boxes are wrong. She moved to a small table, pouring 2 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher. She pushed one toward him. Do you know what the single biggest cost is in my business, Andrew? It's not fuel, it's not planes, it's turnover. We lose 60% of ground staff like you within the first year. We burn through people. And we have a service crisis because the people who face our customers, the gate agents, the security, they're overwhelmed, undertrained, and often linguistically incapable. She took a sip of water. That family was a spark. You were a fire extinguisher. My entire corporate philosophy is to find and eliminate sparks, but I've never considered employing the extinguisher. Just then, the door opened. A harried-looking woman in an HR blazer leaned in. Ms. Vance, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We really do need Mr. Barnes to come with me for the disciplinary. The disciplinary meeting is cancelled, Vance said, her voice leaving no room for argument. You will instead email me the entire hiring file for Andrew Barnes and every performance review he has ever had by 5 p.m. today. Also, I want the last 3 years of exit interview data for all ground operations staff. Look for any mention of language barriers or unused skills. Can you do that? The HR woman blinked, her script in tatters. Yes, of course. Good, close the door on your way out. The silence returned, heavier now. Andrew realized the water in his hand was trembling. He set it down. Why are you doing this? He asked. Vance sat down finally, leaning forward. Because a broken system that loses me money is one thing. A broken system that hides a solution in plain sight is an unforgivable stupidity. You're not an employee, Andrew. You're a diagnostic tool. You just showed me a critical failure in my company's architecture. But as she spoke, a phone on the table lit up, not with a call but with a cascade of social media notifications. A colleague had texted her a link. Vance tapped it, and a video began to play on the large screen monitor on the wall. It was shaky, shot from a passenger's phone. There was Andrew in his bright vest, stepping into the frame. The clear, calm Arabic, the family's instant relief, the stunned border agent. The video ended just as Vance herself walked into the shot, her briefcase dropping. The title read, Airport Hero, Baggage Handler Speaks Arabic, Saves Family from Deportation, CEO Stunned. It already had 200,000 views. Vance didn't look angry. She looked like a general who just saw the enemy's battle plans. It seems, she said quietly, the story is no longer internal. The corporate machine, however, has many gears, and while the CEO's will is law, the middle management layer is designed for inertia. Mike, the supervisor, was not powerless. He had unions to whisper to, safety protocols to cite, and a deep-seated resentment for a subordinate who'd made him look foolish in front of the ultimate boss. That afternoon, as Andrew returned to his shift, under direct, if bewildering, orders from Vance to continue his duties as normal, the backlash began in whispers. The break room chatter died when he entered. His usual partner on the luggage belt forgot to signal him, sending a heavy case tumbling. It was the silent, brutal language of an ecosystem rejecting a foreign body. Meanwhile, in the executive suites, the reaction was more refined, but no less hostile. The head of ground operations, a man named Carl Renfro who'd risen from the bag room himself 30 years ago, saw the video in his monthly leadership meeting. His face darkened. "This is a nightmare," he grumbled to his deputy. "Now every kid with a phrase book is going to think they can waltz onto the concourse. We have protocols for a reason, safety first." The deputy, younger and more digitally savvy, ventured, "Sir, the public sentiment is incredibly positive, and Ms. Vance seems personally involved." "Public sentiment doesn't load planes on time," Renfro snapped, "and personal involvement from the C-suite usually ends with someone like me getting blamed for a problem I didn't create." He drafted an email to HR, carbon copying legal, emphasizing the significant liability risk of non-certified personnel performing quasi-official translation services. It was a preemptive strike, building a paper trail. Andrew, caught between these tectonic plates, could only go home, to his small, cluttered apartment that smelled of spaghetti and crayons, to Lily, his 6-year-old, who was his whole world. She was the reason for every compromise, every silent acceptance. He'd left a world of intellectual pursuit for the brutal, reliable physics of baggage handling so he could be present, so he could never miss a school play or a parent-teacher conference. That night, as he helped her with her reading, his phone buzzed incessantly, numbers he didn't recognize, friend requests from strangers, a local news station asking for comment. He ignored them all, focusing on Lily's slow sounding out of the word extraordinary. "What's it mean, Daddy?" she asked. "It means something very unusual, very special, outside the ordinary. Like you speaking that funny language on TV," she said innocently. He froze. "What?" "Mrs. Jenkins showed us on the smartboard. She said my daddy was a hero." Lily beamed with pride. A cold dread washed through him. His two worlds, the anonymous, safe world of the airport floor and the precious, private world of fatherhood, were colliding. His invisibility was gone. The next morning, the formal offer arrived, not via HR, but in a plain envelope delivered by a corporate courier to his home address. It was a letter from Ilara Vance herself. The language was dry legal. It outlined a newly created 90-day pilot position, multilingual customer resolution specialist. The description was vague, but the salary was not. It was triple his current hourly wage with benefits. He would report directly to a new office on the corporate concourse. His primary duty: liaise and de-escalate high-tension customer service scenarios involving language barriers. Attached was a non-disclosure agreement and a strict social media clause. The final line was handwritten in sharp blue ink: "The system failed to see you, I will not. EV." It was a lifeline, a validation of every skill he'd buried. It was also a trapdoor out of the life he'd painfully built. He'd no longer be part of the crew. He'd be management adjacent, a curiosity, a corporate experiment. He thought of the cold shoulders in the break room. He thought of Mike's fury. He thought of Lily's teacher showing that video to a classroom of children. As he held the letter, his personal phone rang. It was his union rep, a weary-sounding man named Tony. "Andrew, got a minute? Look, the company's offering you this special job. The guys are talking. They think you're cutting a side deal. Management's pushing a new language competency review for all ground staff, saying it optional, but nobody believes it. They're scared it'll be used to cut jobs. You're making waves, kid, big waves. Just be careful. Some of these waves can drown you." Andrew stared out his kitchen window at the grey dawn. The offer letter was a ticket up and out, but it was also a weapon that had already been loaded and aimed, not just at him, but at everyone he worked beside. Ilara Vance saw a diagnostic tool and a solution. Carl Renfro saw a liability and a threat. His co-workers saw a traitor climbing a ladder they didn't even know existed. And in the digital world, the video was nearing 1 million views. The comments were a tidal wave of public opinion. "This man is worth 10 managers. Why isn't this standard? Fire the security guy, promote the hero." The story was no longer about a single act of kindness. It had become a public referendum on the value of hidden skills and a brutal corporate chess game. Andrew Barnes, the single dad who just wanted to do his job and get home, was now the contested piece at the center of the board, and both sides were preparing their next move. Andrew signed the contract. He did it for Lily, for the triple salary, for the chance to use his mind again. But in doing so, he unknowingly walked into a trap that had been set long before he ever stepped onto the concourse. His first day as the multilingual customer resolution specialist was a masterclass in corporate isolation. His new office was a converted storage room near Gate A12, with a desk, a phone, and a window looking out at the ramp he used to work. He was given a bland polo shirt with the company logo, a step up from the vest but a world away from a suit. He was neither ground crew nor management. He was a floating, singular entity, and he was alone. Ilara Vance's plan was strategic. She didn't parade him in front of the media. Instead, she had him shadow the worst-performing gate agents during the busiest international banks. His mandate was simple: observe and only intervene when a language barrier was about to cause a meltdown. It was a live audit, and the data was damning. In just 1 week, Andrew logged over 40 incidents where a passenger's distress was directly tied to a staff member's inability to understand them. He resolved 90% of them with a few calm sentences. But each intervention was a tiny grenade tossed into the middle management structure. Gate agents, already stressed, resented being babysat by a baggage handler. Supervisors like Mike spread the word. Barnes was a spy, Vance's pet, gathering intel to justify outsourcing their jobs. The union, now officially involved, filed a grievance against the creation of the specialist role, calling it a union-busting tactic to create a two-tiered workforce. The backlash wasn't just emotional, it was procedural. Andrew's new ID badge repeatedly failed to open security doors he needed. His access to the customer service database was accidentally revoked twice. A report he filed on a near-violent altercation at the Frankfurt gate, where he'd used his German to calm a passenger, was lost by the station manager. The system was fighting back, and it was winning through 1,000 paper cuts. Then the story broke in the business press. An investigative journalist at the Globe Tribune, tipped off by a disgruntled mid-level executive, published a piece titled "The Orajet Experiment. Can a baggage handler fix a broken culture?" It framed Andrew not as a hero, but as a human band-aid on a hemorrhaging wound. It quoted anonymous sources in management calling the role a public relations stunt and a direct insult to our trained customer service professionals. It also revealed a shocking, previously buried statistic. Orajet had quietly paid out over $2 million in the last 5 years to settle lawsuits related to discrimination and service failures involving non-English speaking passengers. The article was a bomb. It validated the union's fears and enraged the executive team. Carl Renfro, the head of ground operations, saw his chance. He called an emergency meeting with legal and HR without informing Vance. On the agenda, the Barnes problem. His argument was coldly pragmatic. This role is a legal nightmare waiting to happen. He is not a certified translator. If he mistranslates a safety instruction or a legal right, the liability is unlimited. We are letting an uncertified, non-union employee perform high-risk diplomatic functions. We must shut it down for the safety of the company. A memo was drafted, recommending the immediate termination of the pilot program and the reassignment of Mr. Barnes to a position commensurate with his original training and union classification. In corporate speak, it was a death sentence. They were going to send him back to the bag room at his old pay, humiliated and broken. Vance got wind of the meeting 5 minutes after it adjourned. Her fury was monumental. She didn't call Renfro. She walked into the executive boardroom where he was having a celebratory coffee with his deputy. The scene was described later by a cleaning crew member who happened to be vacuuming the hall. Vance's voice, usually so controlled, was audible through the door. "You think this is about one man? This is about $2 billion in market cap. We lose every time a video of us failing goes viral. You are not protecting the company. You are protecting your own obsolete fiefdom." She left, slamming the door. But the battle lines were now public within the company. It was the progressive, data-driven CEO versus the old guard who built their careers on the way things have always been done. Andrew was merely the battlefield. And then the world handed them a crisis that made the first incident look trivial. A massive system-wide outage struck the airline's global booking platform. Flights were cancelled, gates changed, connections missed. Thousands of passengers were stranded across the network. At Andrew's home airport, the situation reached a boiling point by midnight. The international arrivals hall was a sea of angry, tired, confused people. Among them was a large group of 80 elderly pilgrims returning from Mecca, none of whom spoke a word of English. Their tour operator had abandoned them. They were scared, disoriented, and had no idea how to get on their rebooked flights. The lone gate agent assigned to them was a 22-year-old named Chloe, who was on her third double shift. She was on the verge of tears, shouting in English over the din, holding up a sign with a flight number, getting nowhere. A supervisor called for security as the crowd's anxiety threatened to spill over. From his post, Andrew saw it unfolding. This was exactly the scenario his role was created for. But he also saw Carl Renfro standing at the edge of the concourse, arms crossed, watching. It was a test. If Andrew failed, Renfro would have the proof he needed to kill the program. If he succeeded, he might inflame the situation further. Andrew took a deep breath and walked into the chaos. He didn't approach the agent first. He walked to the eldest member of the group, a man with a kind, weary face. He bowed slightly, placed a hand over his heart, and spoke in the formal, respectful Arabic of the holy cities. Ahlan wa sahlan ya Haji, ana ismi Andrew, Sa'adikum. Welcome, pilgrim, my name is Andrew, I am here to help you. The effect was instantaneous. The man's eyes filled with tears of relief. He turned and spoke to the group, and a wave of calm passed through them. Andrew then worked with Chloe, translating clearly. He organized them into lines by family, explained the new flight information, and even secured blankets and water from a reluctant catering manager by name-dropping Vance's direct order. He didn't just solve a problem, he performed an act of public care on a staggering scale. And this time, dozens of phones were recording. The footage was raw, powerful, and undeniable. It showed the moment the tension broke, the moment a roomful of fear turned into gratitude. It showed Andrew not as a hero, but as a conduit of basic human dignity. The videos went supernova. The hashtag #WhereIsYourAndrew trended globally. Other airlines were tagged. Customer service departments were flooded with questions about their language policies. The story was no longer about one man or one airline. It became a global conversation about how we treat each other in moments of crisis. In the corporate war room, watching the live feeds, Ilara Vance allowed herself a small, hard smile. She turned to her chief communications officer. Release the statement, now. At the same moment, Carl Renfro was in his office, staring at the same footage on his screen, his face ashen. He knew he had lost. The public had voted. The data was irrefutable. The memo from legal and HR appeared in his inbox. The subject line, withdrawn. But the real twist, the revelation that would change everything, came from an unexpected source. 2 days after the Pilgrim crisis, a sealed envelope arrived at Andrew's apartment. It was from the law firm representing the refugee family from the original incident. Inside was a formal letter of thanks and a notice. The family, with the help of their brother, was filing a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation against the airport's border security contractor for discriminatory conduct. And they were listing Andrew Barnes not as a witness, but as an asterisk material example of the reasonable accommodation that should have been available. He was being pulled into a federal investigation. The letter ended with a personal note from the father, translated by his brother. You saw us as people first. The system saw us as a problem. Thank you for being our voice when we had none. Andrew sat at his kitchen table, the legal documents spread before him. He realized with a cold clarity that his quiet act of help had now become a lever in a much larger fight. He was no longer just an employee in a corporate struggle. He was a named party in a civil rights action. Ilara Vance had seen him as a diagnostic tool. Carl Renfro saw him as a liability. The public saw him as a symbol, but the family saw him as proof. Proof that the system was broken and that individuals could still force it to bend. He had a choice. He could quietly back away, let the lawyers handle it, and keep his new, fragile career. Or he could step forward and add his voice to the complaint, risking everything he'd just gained. He looked at a drawing Lily had made that day at school. It showed a man in an orange vest holding the hands of 2 big, smiling people. At the bottom, she'd written, "My daddy connects the world." The phone rang. It was Ilara Vance. Her voice was brisk, but there was an unfamiliar tension in it. "Andrew, the dot complaint, we need to talk. My car is outside. I'll be there in 10 minutes." The battle for the soul of the airline was over. A new, much more personal war was about to begin. And for the first time, Andrew Barnes held all the power. The car that arrived wasn't a corporate limousine. It was Ilara Vance's personal sedan, sleek and silent. She was driving herself. When Andrew got in, the first thing she said wasn't about lawyers or public relations. It was a question that changed the entire game. "What do you want, Andrew?" He expected a briefing, a strategy, a corporate line to toe. Instead, she was offering him the wheel. He looked out the window at the passing streetlights. "I want what I did to matter beyond a 90-day pilot program. I don't want to be your experiment. I want to be the reason the experiment ends and a real policy begins." Vance was quiet for a full minute, navigating the night traffic. "The Department of Transportation complaint is a sledgehammer," she said finally. "If you testify for that family, you will be publicly dismantling our security contractor and by extension, our entire passenger handling protocol. The board will see it as an act of war. Carl Renfro will have the ammunition he needs to force me out." Andrew turned to her. "Then why are you asking me what I want?" "Because," she said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, "for the first time in 20 years, I might be on the wrong side of a war worth losing." They drove to a quiet overlook point near the airport. The runway lights stretched into the darkness like a lit pathway to nowhere. Vance laid out the brutal calculus. The company could fight the dot complaint, drag the family through years of litigation, and distance itself from Andrew. It would likely win. Or Andrew could testify. He would become a powerful witness for the family, but he would be blacklisted in the industry. His role would be terminated. The Andrew model would be buried as a dangerous failure. "There is a third option," Vance said, her voice low, "but it requires you to trust me further than I have any right to ask." Her plan was audacious. Andrew would agree to testify, but Vance, as CEO, would not fight him. Instead, she would publicly announce that Orajet was adopting the family's complaint as a catalyst for sweeping, immediate reform. She would voluntarily implement the changes the DOT would have demanded. A 24-hour multilingual support hotline, mandatory language competency assessments for all customer-facing staff, with a 5% premium pay for certified language skills, and the creation of a permanent passenger resolution team modeled on Andrew's role, but staffed from within the existing union workforce. It was a preemptive surrender that aimed to turn a loss into a legacy. For Vance, it was a chance to fundamentally reshape her company and secure her place as a transformative leader, not just a profitable one. For Andrew, it was a guarantee that his actions would cement systemic change. But the risk was all his. He would have to stand before a federal investigator and recount his own company's failures. There would be no guarantee of a job at the end of it. Andrew thought of Lily's drawing, "My daddy connects the world." He thought of the elderly pilgrim's tearful relief. He thought of the invisible thousands he would never meet, who would move through airports a little less afraid because of a policy his courage helped write. "I'll do it," he said. The following weeks were a whirlwind of quiet, grueling preparation. Andrew met with the family's lawyers. He gave a sworn deposition that was both meticulous and devastating. He described not just the incident, but the culture of willful blindness that preceded it. He explained how the economic value of his skills had been systematically ignored, citing the very studies Vance's own team had later unearthed. When the news broke, the corporate world held its breath. Orajet's stock dipped, then stabilized. The headlines were relentless. Baggage handler takes on airline giant from the inside. CEO backs employee whistleblower in unprecedented move. Carl Renfro resigned to pursue other opportunities. The day before the DOT formally accepted Orajet's voluntary remediation plan, the old guard had fallen. The union, after initial shock, became an unexpected ally. The promise of premium pay for language skills transformed the grievance. They negotiated fiercely, ensuring the new policy benefited their members, turning a threat into a tangible win. Mike, Andrew's old supervisor, avoided him for weeks, then finally stopped him in the parking lot. He didn't apologize. He just shook his head and said, you know they're actually paying Rodriguez extra now because he speaks Tagalog. Kid's gonna put a down payment on a house. It was the closest to "you were right" Andrew would ever get. The official hearing was anticlimactic. With Orijet not contesting the facts, the focus became the implementation of the new policies. Andrew's testimony was a formality, but a powerful one. He was asked why he intervened that first day. His answer was simple: because they were people and they were afraid. My job title didn't change that fact. 6 months later, the transformation was tangible. The Orijet Connect program was lauded as an industry benchmark. Other airlines began announcing similar initiatives, not out of altruism, but because the market demanded it. The public had spoken. Human dignity was now a measurable component of brand value. For Andrew, the personal payoff was quieter, deeper. He was offered a permanent role as the Director of Passenger Experience Strategy, a title that came with a salary that finally reflected his worth. He took it on one condition: that his office remain on the concourse, not in the executive tower. He needed to hear the airport's heartbeat. Ilara Vance kept her position, her authority solidified. She and Andrew developed a relationship of fierce, mutual respect. They were not friends. They were allies who had stared into an abyss of corporate failure and chosen to build a bridge instead. But the final, surprising detail emerged from an unlikely audit. When implementing the language pay premium, HR had to verify skills. They discovered that over 15% of their ground crew and catering staff already had undocumented, fluent language skills, from Farsi to Swahili to Vietnamese. These were people who, like Andrew, had buried that part of themselves to fit into a system that didn't value it. The Andrew model hadn't just found one hidden asset. It had revealed an entire treasure trove of human capital the company had been sitting on for decades. One evening, Andrew was working late when Vance stopped by his concourse office. She handed him a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of a customer satisfaction graph, spiking sharply upward for the first time in years. At the top, someone had scribbled in marker, "The Andrew Effect." "It's not about me," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's why it's working." He drove home to Lily, to their apartment that was now filled with a new, secure kind of quiet. He helped her with her homework. She was learning about communities. "Daddy," she asked, "what's your job now?" He thought about it. "I help make sure nobody feels lost." She nodded, satisfied. "That's a good job." The crisis that began with a single, dropped briefcase had ended not with a termination, but a transformation. It proved that value isn't always where you're looking for it, and that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the one that has learned to speak from the silence. Andrew Barnes, the single dad, the baggage handler, the linguist, had stopped asking for a seat at the table. He had instead helped build a new one. So what does the story of Andrew Barnes mean? It's not a fairy tale about a sudden promotion. It's a blueprint. A blueprint for what happens when we stop confusing a uniform with a person's worth. When we choose to see the hidden skills in the people we've trained ourselves to overlook. The research we found at the start wasn't theoretical. It was a diagnosis. A diagnosis of an economy that systematically undervalues the very human connectors it desperately needs. Andrew's story proves that the most valuable asset in any service industry isn't technology or protocol. It's empathy translated into action. And that translation often happens in the languages we haven't bothered to learn. The lingering question isn't about airports. It's about your world. Look around your own workplace, your community. Who is the Andrew who possesses a quiet, critical skill that the system has rendered invisible? The cashier who is a brilliant poet. The delivery driver who is a certified mediator. The night cleaner who speaks 3 languages. We have built entire economies on the cost of their labor, while ignoring the capital of their humanity. This isn't just about being nice, it's about being smart. The data doesn't lie. Businesses that recognize and utilize the full spectrum of their employees' abilities are more resilient, more innovative, and more human. They turn hidden value into visible profit. Andrew's journey from the cargo bay to the boardroom, on his own terms, shows us that change doesn't always start with a roar. Sometimes, It starts with a whisper in a language few understand and the courage of one person to listen. If this story resonated with you, we'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We read every single one. And tell us which moment stayed with you the most. Was it the dropped briefcase, the union's fear, or the quiet victory of a policy that finally paid people for the whole of who they are? If you believe the world needs more stories like this, stories that look beyond the surface to find the real engines of human connection, then please hit that subscribe button. We are dedicated to bringing you narratives of hidden depth and unexpected hope every single week. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community. Remember, the most powerful revolutions often begin not with a shout, but with a moment of understanding. Take care of your heart and never stop looking for the Andrews in your own life.